Some time ago, I composed and recorded a song for Hanukkah. The Hebrew words were written by the author Marcia Falk, and this is the English translation. Let us seek the unseen sparks that kindle the greater lights. And in the context of today's session, those unseen sparks are hope.
As we pour the water for our Advent wreath, we remember our deep thirst for God's hope.
We long for your hope, O God.
Hope which revives us like that first icy cold drink of water, gulped down from the fridge when you've trudged home from school on a 36-degree day.
We long for your hope, O God.
Hope which transforms us like drought-breaking rain on a parched land.
We long for your hope, O God.
Hope which carries us forward in its mystery as the endless waves which connect us to the rest of the world.
We long for your hope, O God.
During our lockdown, I can remember someone saying to me one day, "Where do we get hope from?" And my response to it was, well, what's the point of faith? Isn't all this work that I put into trying to grow faith, or isn't that about sustaining hope even in a crisis? Not to exit from the crisis or run away from it, but to enable me to enter into crises while remaining hopeful, isn't it? So I sort of went, surely that's why we would have this faith. And why is it important for us today? Well, if we go back to the original birth of Jesus stories, which occurred in the Roman Empire, the politics, economics and social strategy of the Roman Empire was to extract resources from 95% of the population. And the best way to extract resources is to take hope from them. If you're born a peasant in the Roman Empire, and it is quite clear that you have no chance of moving upwards or sideways or anywhere, if we can keep you oppressed, then you'll produce resources which enable 5% of the population to live like there is no lack of resources at all. And so into this political and social reality comes the story of Luke. And so the first group of people that Luke meet are the shepherds. Now, why is that symbolic? Shepherds are the most downtrodden parts of society. They're landless, no-hopers who are perpetually unemployed, somewhere between a cross of sort of like no-hopers and local sort of like bikie gangs. So shepherds were not perceived as good people. So into this scenario, Luke writes a story that says that the shepherds receive the attention of thousands of angels. They sing a beautiful song to the shepherds. Most people are going, that is a complete waste of money on shepherds. What are they ever going to do? They're not. It's sort of like inviting the local gang to your son's christening. In 21st century language, what we could understand the story as is the democratization of hope. So for the first time, everybody has access to hope, even the shepherds. Hope is a word that we use in all sorts of contexts, and it's traditionally the theme of the first week of Advent, which is this week. And so we're wanting to explore hope, and so we asked a bunch of people to come along and contribute to a panel on what is hope and how do we find it. And so we're going to hear from these extraordinary people, and we're going to allow them to explore hope, just as the Luke story encourages us to do.
So welcome everyone to the Hope panel, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Deborah, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion about hope, where you find it, how you find it, what you do with it, and I guess where it takes you and who it takes you with. So hope is particularly timely at this time of year with Christmas. You can see this lovely Christmas scene behind us. And I just love the way you've got this kind of massive wave of hope. Sorry, my arms disappeared there, but with all these angels and the star, and hope's kind of in the middle. Despair's kind of being in the middle, being completely overcome. But also, I've been thinking a lot about hope recently with coming out of lockdown and climate change and COP26, and I've recently read this article by a scientist called Suzanne Moser, and she talks about the varied flavours of hope, and she specifically mentions two types of hope called active hope, which is where you find hope and then you have to do something about it, and it's all about where it takes you, and radical hope, where you don't know what your future's like, you know that your world's completely collapsing and you have to reinvent yourself and your future and hope, and everything kind of completely changes. And on top of that, I think there's also inactive hope, right, where we go, oh, she'll be right, and do nothing about it. And then we've got faith, which is hope on steroids. So on that kind of note, I'd like to hear from our panel members and see what you guys think. So let's start with Angie. Angie, would you like to share some of your thoughts on the concept of hope?
Thanks, Deborah. Yes, I'd love to. Well, to begin, in his 2004 book, Celebrating Life, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks wrote, "One of the most important distinctions I have learned in the course of reflection on Jewish history is the difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is the belief that things will get better. Hope is the belief that together we can make things better. Optimism is a passive virtue, hope is an active one. It takes no courage really to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to have hope." Now, in English, hope is traditionally a somewhat abstract idea of expectation, more of as you say, a passive desire that things will turn out well. But the word for hope in Hebrew, tikva, is more concrete. In Hebrew, the word means a strong and confident expectation. And it also means cord or rope, which comes from a root word that means to bind. So we bind ourselves to hope through action. Many Holocaust survivors rebuilt their lives because they had hope. To create new families, to work hard to create businesses, as so many survivors of cataclysmic events will do, because they maintained hope for a better future through direct action. The opposite of hope is numbness, which paralyzes action. And of course, there are many reasons why we experience it and why sometimes people are so overwhelmed that they are unable to overcome it. Now, I've experienced it in times of terrible stress in my life. That feeling of wanting to pull the doona over my head and shut out the world, of feeling that the possibility of a good future is rapidly receding. But thanks to having trained as a psychotherapist and a teacher of meditation, I taught myself to sit with the feeling, to notice it where it resided in my body until it began to subside. Then, and only then, would I be able to regain a sense of empowerment by planning the next steps. So, where do we find hope? Where do I find hope? At a personal level, for the past 30 years, I've suffered from an autoimmune condition which limits my life. The symptoms come and go, but it's always there in the background. But my hope is twofold. At an everyday level, experience has taught me that the acute flares of my condition will subside and the creativity and joy in life will flow again. I take action by employing the methods I know will allow my system to reset. But I also had to learn to ask for help when I needed it. Something which didn't come easily to me because I identified more as a carer than as someone who received care. The direct action of hope rarely resides simply in oneself. We are beings in community, and that is one of the great underpinnings of hope. But my second source of hope is my sense of connection with all that is. When I sit in contemplation, in relationship with the One, the spark kindles the greater light, and it provides perspective and a deep sense of comfort. I am not alone, and no matter what happens, my spirit is safe in the universe. At a community level, it's easy for us to be disconsolate when confronted by the manifold problems of the world. Sometimes it seems that hatred, violence, and greed will triumph. We can feel immobilized, numbed by the magnitude of the task. But as the Talmud says, you are not required to finish the work, yet neither are you permitted to desist from it. Just because we can't stop climate change or famine or violence doesn't mean we shouldn't do our small part of what we Jews call Tikkun olam, mending the world. Because in so doing, we bring hope not only to ourselves, but to our corner of the world. Now, the song that I wrote and which you heard earlier celebrates Hanukkah. And on the 28th of November, Hanukkah begins, the Festival of Lights. It memorializes the miracle of the one jar of lamp oil which lasted for 8 nights during the revolt of the Maccabees in 162 BC, and which resulted in victory. On each night of Hanukkah, we light an additional candle in the special menorah we call a Hanukkah. We increase the light in our homes and synagogues night by night, and we place the Hanukkah in a window where the light can be seen by all. For when we work together to bring light to the world, we banish the darkness for all by turning hope into action. Thank you
so much, Angie. That's I particularly love that idea of action, and the way you can draw out the differences with between hope in different languages. That's fabulous. Let's turn to Greg. Greg, could you share some of your thoughts, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you, Angie. That was just fabulous. I'm going to be much more personal and modest, I suppose, in my account. Tomorrow, we're speaking. You locate us in the Jewish calendar, Angie. In the Gregorian one, we're in mid-November, and tomorrow I'm going skiing. It's not really normal to go skiing in mid-November when you live in Australia. It's a delight to be able to do so. And I'll be doing so with a very dear friend who I haven't managed to see in recent times because of lockdown. So we'll have a lovely 24 hours together. But it does, being skiing in mid-November, it's not a normal thing, and it makes me wonder what we are doing to our planet. And also how we respond, not just at a system level, which is COP26 and so much that's been in our news recently, but at a personal level. Policymakers speak of mitigation and adaptation, and tomorrow for me is really adaptation. It's responding to a new normal. It's responding to a normal where the snowfields are covered in snow in a time where otherwise we might be at the beach or sailing. But it also is a reminder. The friend I'm going tomorrow is very active in Extinction Rebellion, and so our minds will be very much on the macro. And in this, I'd just like to take a small technical turn, because this is it'll lead me to where I want to end up. And the technical turn goes into not just adaptation, which policymakers talk about, but mitigation, reducing emissions, which is obviously what we need to do, and to do so quickly and to do so radically. And there are 5 areas where we need to do it. Just thinking broadly. Electricity, the stuff that's powering our call now, our ability to speak. Transport, buildings, agriculture and industry. And in 3 of those, we have the answers straight before us. In electricity, we all know we're just getting a solar system installed on our house to add to the solar water. We know the answer. Transport, we don't yet have a Prius or a Tesla. Wouldn't it be lovely? Buildings, it's lots and lots of close the gaps, put stuff in the walls. It's lots and lots of small steps, but it's not hard. We know the answer. Agriculture, it's all about animals. They emit methane. Methane's potent. Dairy and meat. Technology will be our friend in this place. We can see the supermarket shelves. Our local Woolworths has probably 20% of the meat section is now a non-meat section. It's the same format, but it's not meat. Industry, it's hard, but it's the big end of town. They got lots of money. They're cashed up. So we've sort of got the answers in many ways. We don't have the agreement. COP26 shows us the challenge in getting there. It's a million small steps, and it's a question of whether those small steps happen faster than the large change we're inducing for ourselves. But in my mind, it's a little bit like Angela Merkel in, 2016, and the million refugees who came into Germany. They shuffled us. We will achieve it. It's, I think to use your term, Angie, it's an active hope. It's a strong sense. We know the future. We'll bring ourselves there. So if I wasn't going skiing tomorrow for me might be a passion I now have that came out of lockdown last year. In Canberra last year, we had a lockdown of some 3 weeks or so. It was fairly short. And it was one of those breaks in patterns, as lockdowns are. They radically change our world for shorter periods. And we have a choice about what we do in that, of whether to pursue the same things in a constrained sense or lament the things we can't do, or embrace new. And I tried some online dancing and realised I'm glad I never tried it in person. You can hide better online sometimes. I also tried unicycling. A nice way to make the best of a small space. And unicycling is an improbable activity. It's absurd, really. You're on one wheel, you don't have anything to stand on. You can fall in every single direction, and regularly do. And yet at the same time, there's something pure about it. It's something simple. And it leads to lovely dreams. Seeing our wonderful backdrops in the screen, my immediate thought was, wouldn't it be wonderful to unicycle along the top of that line and just drop down gently onto the cross at the end? It'd be the most wonderful descent. It looks so gentle and soft. Even if you fell over, you'd be cuddled by the cloud. So it's a very joyful activity, even if it's completely improbable. And I think there's a sort of paradox in there that I think, and Angie, if I can pick up another of the points you made, I think for me, unicycling defines me both as an optimist, perhaps sort of hoping almost against hope in something that's improbable, but also as someone with hope that doing something like that will bring joy and pleasure and continue to do so. So thank you, Deborah. Some personal thoughts.
That's great. I think it brings not just joy to you. I feel like every time I've ever seen anyone on a unicycle, I've experienced joy as well, just watching them. So, yeah, that's great. Okay, can we hear now from Alistair, please?
Thanks, Deborah, and thanks, Greg and Angie. I'm really moved and stimulated by what you've offered. And I apologise for my background and my technological ineptitude. My image suggests that my hope is based in theological books, so I am, of all people, most to be pitied. This is such a great theme to reflect on as we emerge, hopefully, from the worst of COVID, in this country at least. So many of the people I encounter are feeling exhausted and lacking motivation and experiencing anxiety. But it's not just COVID. I remember reading British theologian David Ford, who was at Cambridge before he retired, a few years ago, and he called our current age the age of overwhelmedness. And the phrase has really stayed with me. And maybe when we feel overwhelmed, hope is often a casualty. And on my understanding, hope is that thing that draws us forward and gives us some sort of meaning and energy in the present. I'm feeling like Greg, I'm feeling more animated this week than I have for many months. Why? Because in 5 days and 12 hours, my beloved and I are heading off on a road trip to regional Victoria. We haven't been able to do that for so long. And that very prospect is energising me. I'm on a promise, as it were, I guess. But how does hope actually function? It's clearly based in the future, so it's not a certainty. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? My car trip could fall over for any number of reasons. But that future imagining, that dream, if you like, motivates me now. And that's what I've arrived this week on, reflecting. The dream language immediately takes me to that remarkable speech by the great preacher and social reformer Martin Luther King. I have a dream, those goosebumpy words that he uttered in 1963, in that he said, "With this faith we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope." He's also famous for saying that the arc of history bends towards justice. And I often reflect, what was he thinking? What did he mean by that? I read a recent article by a US social commentator I respect, who said this: "A rejuvenated white supremacy and an emboldened patriarchy," he's talking about post-Trump, "record-breaking economic human inequality, a withering level of empathy, catastrophic climate change caused by human greed." It's a very grim list. Did Martin Luther King really believe that human life was becoming more just and equitable? Or, as a Christian, was he talking about his hope that in the end, God's justice would prevail? The time, in the words of the prophet Amos, which he included in that great speech, where justice will flow down like a mighty river and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. There's a well-known critique of religion from Karl Marx, that it serves as the opiate or the opium of the people. And I'm sure that at times has been the case. Religion, including Christianity, has encouraged from time to time forms of passivity. But you don't need to look far for exceptions, namely where Christianity and Judaism, of course, and its vision for justice has been the catalyst for creative discontent and activism for change and for justice. In terms of the only tradition I know the Christian tradition, I'd locate our hope in the belief in the resurrection of Christ. However you might describe that. Resurrection faith at heart affirms the belief that ultimately the power of God's love is greater than evil. It's as simple as that when God's will is realised on earth as in heaven, justice will reign and love will be the law of life. In practical terms, how does this function as motivating hope rather than pie in the sky when you die? And here's my little takeaway. And I'm quoting a great Christian biblical scholar of the Hebrew Scriptures, Walter Brueggemann. He offers the term hopeful imagination, cultivating hopeful imagination. That is, imagining or dreaming, in Martin Luther King's term, what God's will for justice and peace might actually look like in our context, and then praying and working for it, active hope, and living as if the arc of history does bend towards justice, and aligning ourselves with that dream. So, yeah, that's what I've got.
What a beautiful idea, the arc of history bending towards.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's almost like, I love your comment about how it almost doesn't matter what he actually thought. It's the power of what he says, isn't it? And that's fascinating.
The power of poetic language.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alistair. And so now we're up to our final speaker, Kate. Could you share some of your thoughts, please?
Thanks, Deborah. My goodness, a bit of a responsibility being the final speaker, I think, coming after all of those great words of wisdom. And Alistair, I just love that you picked up the I Have a Dream speech. I wonder whether you know the story behind that speech, and I'm sure you all do, the story of Martin Luther King and the way he thought about his speeches and spent, the full week deeply researching speeches and so on. And that's how he became such an incredible speaker, and having a father who role modelled that. And the I Have a Dream speech was different from the rest because he was thrown into the arena with very, very little notice. And so I think something like 20 minutes of notice before he gave the speech. And so his whole life of preparing for speeches and deeply thinking about content all of a sudden was thrown out the window. And he knew he had the biggest speech to make of his whole life. And he didn't have the capacity to prepare for that in the way that he normally would. And the first half of the speech was a total failure. When you listen, and I don't mean that in a critical sense, I mean from his reflection of that he felt standing on the stage, he just knew he wasn't connecting with the audience. He wasn't engaging with the audience. And how would he do that? And there's a real turning point in that speech where you can see where he found himself. And he decided that rather than stick to the script that was cobbled together so quickly, that he would just back himself. And for me, there must have been a great sense of a hopeful future of him actually taking the lead and believing in himself. And I just love it, Alistair, that you raised that, because I reflect on that often, the difference between how long it takes us to prepare for things and that when we feel that good things are happening in our lives and we feel that sense of hope, that actually we can back ourselves and step forward with conviction and confidence. And it was just a beautiful thing to settle on. And it made me think about, and I'm not usually one to talk about political speeches, but with hope in mind, it made me think about Barack Obama and his words, which I think are really pertinent in this space. And he talks about hope is not blind optimism. It's not ignoring the enormity of the task ahead or the roadblocks that stand in our path. It's not sitting on the sidelines and shirking from the fight. Hope is the thing inside us that insists, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that something better awaits us. And we have the courage to reach out for it and to work for it and to fight for it. Hope is the belief that destiny will not be written for us, but by us, by women and men who are not content to settle for what the world is now, but have the courage to remake the world as it should be. And it really speaks to me, because I think it kind of feels like active hope. You know, it feels to me like, I guess maybe hope on steroids. And I'm really blessed that I have the privilege of working with our youth. And for me, they are hope on steroids every day. Right. I'm so blessed to be able to get up in the morning and come into a context where all you need to do is open your eyes and look around you, and you see a hopeful, better future. You see all of the things that you know are wrong in the world. You see capacity for that to change in our youth and our young people. And it's been particularly difficult this period of time with COVID and worrying about the media and how much social media and those types of things that our young people are digesting, and just the impact that has on their lives, and thinking about how can we reset that for them? How can we make sure that we do lean into all of the wonderful literature about the importance of hope in our lives, but in particular in the lives of our young people? And so how do we help them disconnect from what they're trying to search existentially outside of themselves, and help them try and connect with what it is that was in that I Have a Dream fantastic call to action, and also in Barack Obama's call to action. So I'm often thinking about how can we support our community to better understand the hope is within you. It's not outside of you, it's actually within you. And so when I think about hope, I think about it in three different ways. I think about it from my family's perspective. So, you know, I have a responsibility to my family, to our 5 kids. They're all adults now, but to my friends and so on. And how do I, when they come to me with challenges and concerns, how do I reflect that in a way that's respectful, but also has a sense of this too will pass? That this feels heavy and difficult now, but there's always hope for a brighter tomorrow. And I think about it from a professional capacity, and understanding that for each of us, people turn to us for support, for advice, for wisdom, and most importantly, they turn to us for a sense of hope. And so how is it that we choose to share that with the communities that we're touched by? And so do we do that in formal ways? Do we do it in informal ways? How do we create a sense of security that really leans into hope for a better future for everybody, regardless of circumstances that you might find yourself in? But the hardest of all, the really tricky one, is leading myself. That's the really tough one. Like I can say all the right things when I've got a group of people or a family member sitting in front of me, but in the dark at night, when I'm on my own, that's when I'm most challenged. That's when I'm most at liberty to feel despair. When I'm most at liberty to challenge and question and think, well, maybe there isn't hope in whatever it is, you know. So for me, the greatest challenge I'll ever have is leading myself, because if I can't lead myself, then it's really hard to lead anybody else around me. And it reminds me of, so there's a couple of really great books and the titles don't come to mind, but just talking about self-discipline and talking about if you're not leading your life, then who is? And what a waste of a life. You know, if you're not in control of the one life you have, then that's a shame. And so it does kind of, I guess I feel like making sure I'm grounded and centered and focused on a hopeful future is important. And finally, the other thing that I've observed in my life is that hope and gratitude are closely linked. And how do we think about gratitude in a way that makes us able to find hope within that? And so for whatever situation I have found myself in, you know that old saying, there's always a silver lining. There's always an opportunity to find something great in challenge. And how do I use those two concepts together? Because I think for me they are, they sit so beautifully together. And gratitude is something that I think people can get their hands around. You know, if you sit down and write something down that you're grateful for every day, surely when you finish that, you feel a sense of hope because you know you've had that in your life, or you've got that in your life, or got that to look forward to, like a road trip or whatever it is, skiing or whatever it is that you might have a sense of. So the two concepts, I think, sit really nicely together, and it helps us understand that we all do have the courage to remake the world as it should be. So that's what I'm focused on. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you for making the link not only with gratitude but with courage really explicit. I think, it's easy to see sometimes positive emotions as easy, but I think hope is definitely an act of courage. Now we've got a couple of minutes left. So I was wondering if, Kate, you've kind of moved us into the area of talking about how we can contribute to like spreading hope in our community. And I was wondering if Angie, Greg and Alistair, if there's anything you guys would like to add in on how you guys do that. And yeah.
Just a very quick one on that, and I'd be interested to hear from Angie, who's a psychotherapist. But I think when you're anxious or depressed, it can be very hard to generate hope yourself. And was it you who mentioned the community dimension? I think that's really important for people who are numb and paralysed, immobilised, to find others or a small group or one person with whom to do that one thing that you can do to generate hope, self-worth, all that sort of thing. So that's something I picked up that just reinforced this idea that often we can't generate hope merely from our own resources at times.
Absolutely. During COVID, I set up a group with some of my Facebook friends around the world who were having difficulty with lockdown, with the entire situation, and why not? So I said to my Facebook friends, I'm going to set up a Zoom session once a week. Anyone who wants to drop in, talk about what their issues are. We ended up with a core group of 6 people. And it was amazing how it unfolded. It was just simple. Sometimes they'd bring a joke. Sometimes they'd bring what was going on in their lives. Sometimes they just wanted to talk about the global situation. But eventually they all found a way of coping simply because they had community to hook into. And that's what makes the difference. That's exactly what you're saying. And what so many of us here have said tonight, that we're beings in community. And through that, we are able to generate hope for ourselves and for others.
think, Kate, you were taking us in this sense into a range of potential areas, and I'm very conscious of the challenge, I think, Alistair, as you're saying, to help engage people who are depressed or anxious. I think it's a fundamental moral challenge that we have, but I find it a very hard one to achieve. What I find a little bit easier is to just think about big problems and break them down to little ones. I mentioned that with climate change, the 5 elements. At my son is at the end of high school, and they're discussing social media and mobile phone usage and all of the challenges of that. And it seems like the student body has come up with a very simple sort of 3-word approach to that if you're at school, the 3 words are, screens are off and they're away. Off and away. And at one level, that's at school. It's in the limited domain. It's in the domain where there's a lot of support, and there are already social needs can readily be met. But I also find it a very powerful sort of message where the students have been discussing this for much of it was online that they were discussing it, ironically, during lockdown in Canberra that happened over during the mid-months. And now with the return to school. And I think that sense, Kate, of the power of the optimism of youth, the power of youth, that sense of immense, sort of energy that they convey, and that ability to come up with something sort of positive to deal with one of the great social challenges of our time, even if in a way that's within their control as a student body and not in the full world. But that gives me enormous hope.
Well, we might leave it there. I'd like to thank all of you for such thoughtful commentary, and I think hearing the 4 of you speak about hope is actually a really powerful force in making me feel a lot of hope. So I think even the act of, talking your hope out is actually, it creates waves. So thank you, and thank you for your time and for your wisdom.
Well, what a wonderful set of reflections on hope. I'd like to thank each one of our panellists for their wonderful contributions. And in summing up today, I just want to mention 3 things. Firstly, hope begins with dreaming. Alistair and Kate both spoke of Martin Luther King's great speech, I Have a Dream. And Alistair mentioned Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann and his idea of hopeful imagination. Whether we term it dreaming or imagination, part of hope is to project, picture or envision a new reality, a better way that we can be and exist together. King made that concrete by speaking of a future where his children would not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. And then he names places which were particularly racist, and his dream there is that they might be oases of freedom and justice. That was part of his dream. I wonder what your dream is. I wonder what longings you have for our world, what injustices you're fed up with, and what might that dream look like in concrete terms. The Bible's dream of a better world is spoken of in a number of ways, as justice rolling down like waters and righteousness like a never-flowing stream, as a new heaven and a new earth, as a time when every tear will be wiped away, as that place where the lion and the lamb will live together peacefully. All these are ways of speaking of a hopeful new world. Friends, we need imagination. We need the dreaming. Secondly, it begins with dreaming, but it quickly goes on to action. There is a role for action. I think all of our speakers touched on this, including Deborah in her introduction. Angie referred to Rabbi Sacks and the difference between optimism and hope. that hope is distinguished from wishful optimism by the determined activity that accompanies it. And that activity itself breeds more hope. Greg spoke of breaking down complex, intractable problems into smaller parts to make them more manageable, more hopeful, we might say. Many of you will know of Sydney Alliance, a broad-based, grassroots civil action group working for the common good. They tackle a small number of important community issues which seem too big for most of us, such as affordable housing for essential workers, even on the North Shore. Most of us might think this is a ridiculous target, especially in the current crazy market. And yet, with clarity and tenacity, Sydney Alliance identify and work on strategies such as advocating that local and state governments legislate for a greater percentage of social housing or more affordable housing in any new housing developments. Sydney Alliance has achieved some really good outcomes. But my point is this: tell me who feels more hopeful when it comes to affordable housing. Is it those of us watching the news and wringing our hands, worrying about our children and grandchildren and how they'll ever get into the market? Or is it those involved in community meetings and advocating with our elected officials? Being active towards the dream builds hope. There are so many things I would have liked to have commented on. I wish I could have said a lot more, but let me just finish with a story, a personal story. I can't remember precisely when this was, but it made an enormous impact on me. It might have been 10 or 15 years ago. There were some positive signs on a negotiated peace settlement between Israel and the Palestinians. Dialogue was taking place. Momentum was gaining. The signs were good. As I can't remember exactly when this was, because we've all been through this cycle so many times. But at the last minute, of course, some crisis occurred, and all the good work that had been done unravelled in the blink of an eye. And we were back to the same old stalemates that we've become accustomed to in the Middle East. Some of those, what I like to call blessed peacemakers, the ones working behind the scenes, were interviewed and asked for their response to the failure. And I just remember that one of them saying something like, "We will begin tomorrow on working on a new peace plan." Friends, that's hope. That's hope right there. Years of work destroyed in a moment, but the commitment to the dream as strong as ever. As we begin this season of Advent, we're reminded that hope is centred in the knowledge that God has acted in the past and will act again. And indeed, that God is continuing to act towards the great divine dream of the reconciliation and renewal of all things in our world. And our response? Well, we joyfully and courageously throw in our lot to be part of the dream team, we might say. Amen. Well, I think this service will have taken a considerable time, so let me conclude with a sending forth. We go forth taking the faith of Jesus and his vision of hope for the whole world. We go forth with a great commission of offering hope to everybody. We go forth as active, hopeful participants in the great dream of God for a world of justice and peace. Amen. And finally, for the members of our Gordon-Pymble community, just a few notices I wanted to bring. Firstly, a special invitation to the Christmas for Everyone nativity play. It's coming up very quickly, Saturday week, the 11th of December, 5 p.m. at Gordon Church. This will be a fun and interactive evening and a great opportunity for young and old of our congregation to gather together and to celebrate Christmas. Please see the newsletter for a little bit more information and register for this by emailing or calling Courtney. Next, we're really looking forward to gathering in church next Sunday, the 5th of December, for what will be our first in-person service and Holy Communion service for a long time. We can sing. I think I said we'll be at Gordon. But we can sing, but masks will need to be worn inside. There'll be no morning tea, but you are welcome to stay and carefully, at a distance, chat to each other, and especially if we can be outside if the weather is good. So won't that be wonderful? After so many months gathering together for worship again, hearing the organ and singing some of the hymns that you have sent me. Thank you for those who have done so. And a reminder that there will be our annual congregation meeting the following Sunday, the 12th of December, following the service at Gordon. And that's being the annual meeting. We will have the annual financial reports, and there will also be an opportunity to vote for a few of the vacant church council positions. So we look forward to that step in our church. Hopefully we may have a report from the Joint Nominating Committee regarding where they're up to in terms of talking with other ministers. So thanks everybody, and I look forward to seeing you at morning tea, which I understand will be our last morning tea online for some time. Thanks friends, bye-bye.